Hello there, everyone. I am your host, the Sea Monster. I bid you all welcome to a little bit of an unscripted vlog going on here regarding Godzilla Day, or at least Godzilla Day of 2022. Particularly the tributes to Godzilla vs. Gigan for its 50th anniversary, and particularly the live-action short. I have seen the Godzilla vs. Gigan Rex short as well, and that one was pretty cool, but I would say this one here is the one that I've been mainly wanted to talk about. Now, full disclosure, I'm not really much of a fan of Godzilla vs. Gigan, the movie itself. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's the worst entry in the Showa era, not by a long shot. In fact, I would even say, if nothing else, I very much appreciate its existence for introducing us to Gigan, who is considered to be one of the best monsters in the Godzilla roster, particularly of his, one may call it his rogues gallery. But I can't really say that Godzilla vs. Gigan, the movie itself, is objectively good. In fact, if I were to do an essay video on it, I'm pretty sure there would be so many problems that I could find in that movie that it would just... It would be a long one, perhaps. Let's just say. But again, it's not the worst Showa era film. That being said, I was definitely open to seeing what Toho would do with their short film. Considering that I actually liked the Godzilla vs. Hedorah short film that came out the year before, back in 2021, even if that one certainly wasn't quite perfect, particularly involving the fact that the fight between Godzilla vs. Hedorah, parts of it are literally the camera sort of moves away from, perhaps to hide the limitations of the Hedorah suit. Whereas here, there was a lot more promise, considering that Gigan is certainly a much more agile creature. Yeah, that's pretty much what we got going on here. The basic premise of this is very straightforward. In fact, it's actually set after the events of that Godzilla vs. Hedorah short. As if these two short films are considered to be canon with each other. Basically, Godzilla shows up in Japan, and, you got news reporters, one in particular whom we see a little bit of, being the only human character that's even present, just sort of reporting about Godzilla being in Japan or Tokyo. And next thing you know, the cosmic cyborg monster himself, Gigan, appears out of nowhere, and the two start having a spar-off with each other. Now, as much as I sort of appreciate what Toho has been trying to do in terms of the Reiwa era regarding trying to go for more experimental bits of Godzilla content, and as much as I really like the MonsterVerse, pretty much, it's really nice to see Toho every once in a while doing something like this. Something that is much more traditional. The Godzilla suit, the one that's been used from Final Wars, looks very well kept and really nice. There's some parts that you can tell it has aged a little bit, but it's amazing how they were able to preserve that thing. After almost 20 years since the release of Final Wars back in 2004. And as far as the Gigan suit, with that being a much newer suit that they made for this short film, it looks amazing. It's pretty much like the classic Showa era design that Gigan had back in the 70s as opposed to his Final Wars counterpart. But it looks incredible. Without a doubt, it's a wonderful update to that classic design. Or at least a wonderful reinvigoration, wonderful resurrection, if you will, of that old design. And the short film is directed really well. The fight is extremely satisfying. You pretty much get a bit of Gigan shooting his laser eye that seems very much akin, maybe even deliberately so, to his ability of a similar nature in the Atari and Pipeworks games, those being Destroy All Monsters Melee and Save the Earth. There's even a funny moment where Godzilla sort of disables that ability, and that's and Gigan sort of in reaction to it. Even with such a very short amount of time, the film is able to give us a little sense of personality involving the monsters, especially with Gigan. Essentially, this short is such an excellent marriage between styles of the old, such as Suitmation being used to detail monster sequences, and the old, such as in the way it's it's shot. There's pretty much one long shot in particular where Godzilla and Gigan are fighting, and the camera is panning through various portions of the city while that fight is happening in the background, even panning through the inside of an office building, similar to what the MonsterVerse Godzilla films do every now and then during their action sequences, to essentially showcase the grand scale and scope of this epic duel. And yeah, that's pretty much what I would call it. And pretty epic duel. And it's even kind of brutal a couple times, because Godzilla gets slashed up a few times, and it looks pretty gruesome. Basically, the Godzilla vs. Gigan short is an absolute win in my book. It really nails it at the end of the day, in terms of just being a pure spectacle of Suitmation done right. So now this sort of begs the question. It's sort of an age-old question of, should Godzilla films be more traditional or be more experimental? And when I say age-old question, I mean perhaps like since the Reiwa era. And this question has sort of been posed, and sort of wondering if the series should stick to be much more traditional, such as something like this, or something like the MonsterVerse, which clearly don't try to break the mold, but rather just sort of deliver on giving us big, grand monster battles. Or if we should be getting more films that are experimental, or just pieces of Godzilla content in general be more experimental, such as with Shin Godzilla, or with Singular Point, or the Polygon Trilogy, regardless of execution. And let's just say, it's a question that I can't really say can be properly answered, in just like a general basis. It should be more of a case-by-case basis. It's like, the more important question is, if we are doing something experimental, is it any good? Can it be good regardless of whether it's experimental or if it's like the first of its kind? I mean, because with traditional Godzilla films, like, we have plenty of examples of traditional Godzilla films that are good as well as bad. Considering that there's quite a few entries that are traditional that are good, it's sort of a tried and true formula. Whereas a Godzilla film can certainly be more experimental and stand out a lot more, and so I guess it could be appreciated just for the novelty factor. If it's not good, then that novelty factor isn't going to carry it very far. I mean, again, look at the Polygon Trilogy. Like, that series really tried to be experimental, and it was a miserable failure in terms of storytelling and writing and what have you. And if we're talking about Godzilla films that sort of try to do a mix of traditional and experimental elements, like some parts being more traditional and some more experimental, let's take a look at GMK. That film pretty much has a Godzilla versus Ghidorah dynamic that is very different. Not just in terms of their origins being both supernatural in nature when they never were before, but also because their hero-villain dynamic has been totally inverted in that film. Where Ghidorah, who is typically the villain, is pretty much a hero. And yet, that film is considered by many to be one of the best, if not the best, entries in the Millennium Era. And you want to know why? Because it's an objectively good movie that just tried to do things a little differently. But those things that are different didn't compromise anything. In fact, if anything, some of those differences bolstered it. So it's not that a Godzilla film being different is bad. Different is not really a synonym for good or bad. Different is just different. So you can't be wrong for pretty much saying that a Godzilla film, should try to take chances every now and then. But the matter is that if it's well executed, then of course people will be on its side. But if it's not well executed, then, good try, I guess. Basically what I'm saying here is that maybe the most experimental thing Toho should be doing, and if you ask me, I can't really say any of their outings in the Reiwa era, like Shin Godzilla, Polygon Trilogy, or Singular Point, have really been that successful. Like, perhaps, Shin Godzilla certainly, and when I say successful, what I mean is, I can't really say any of them were good, pretty much. Like, they're all just pretty bad, to be honest. So, if you were to ask me, perhaps the most experimental thing Toho should be doing is more stuff like the Godzilla vs. Gigan short film, where we pretty much bring back, traditional stuff just to make it stand out from something like the MonsterVerse, which does rely on CGI a lot more than, most Godzilla films. Just to at least give it a distinct style, if nothing else. I guess my overall consensus on this return of tradition for Toho on their part, such as with this short film, even if it's a temporary return, would go like this, and this is a bit of a paraphrase from the film The Last Samurai. We should all very much appreciate the new stuff that Toho is giving us, but we should not forget where we started, where this franchise started. We can try to learn from the past and maybe even sort of move on from certain parts of it, but we should not shun it completely either, just for the sake of something new. And if you ask me, this short film in Godzilla vs. Gigan is proof as to why sometimes the past isn't such a bad thing to return to after all. And so that pretty much does it with this little unscripted ramble that I've got going on here on the Godzilla vs. Gigan short film, as well as basically the discussion revolving around experimental versus traditional styles of filmmaking for the Godzilla franchise. I guess you should feel free to let me know what you may think of this, perhaps. Again, I don't usually do it unscripted on this channel, but I figured I'd just get something out for anybody who may be wondering of what I think of this short film, while I move on to other things, other projects. So yeah, what do you guys think of this short film? I guess feel free to let me know. Check out the rest of my content here on this channel if you're interested. Give it a. And hope you all pretty much enjoy what I have coming up in the future if this video was a good impression for you. But until then, thank you all for watching, and I will see you all later.